Okay, so let's get started. We're going to be taking a look at how to set up a switched input as well as a trim pot input for our Link G5 and G4X programming. Now, the switched inputs can be used for a variety of different things within runtime values or to turn something off or on within our link. So an example of using a basic on-off toggle switch input to our link would be if you want to have a low and high boost setting. You have a switched input that you can wire in, configure it properly, and then when you turn the switch on, you'll get high boost. Turn the switch off, you'll get low boost. So that's just one example of many, many things we can accomplish with a switched input. Now we also have the ability to set up a trim pot. A trim pot is a little bit different than a switch because it's actually going to be using an analog input, and the trim pot will be a 0 to 5 volt range or scale, and each click position of the trim pot sends a different voltage input to the link, and that voltage input is associated to that switch position. So for example, I'm going to be showing you how to set up an AEM 12 position trim pot. Each click position will be associated to a certain voltage value. We can utilize a trim pot to give the driver a multi-selection option in the operation of the vehicle. So for example, you could have drive-by-wire. You could have multiple drive-by-wire tables based on clicking through that trim pot, different positions. For a boost control, you could have multiple different boost targets when you're going in and you're operating your vehicle. Let's say driver wants more power, it can simply click that trim pot and allow more and more boost to be to request it and to be ran within the boost control routine. If you're talking about traction control, we can use a trim pot to vary the amount of allowable slip between our driven and undriven wheels. So the trim pot is a really handy tool for a driver, giving them a huge ability to vary something like boost or traction control slip on the fly. We don't have to hook up a laptop and do any programming changes. It can all be accounted for within each click position. So both of these are really powerful, and we definitely want to know how to set them up here in the software. Let's first jump in and take a look at the most basic setup and configuration here. That's going to be working with a switched input, turning something on or off. What we're going to do right now is move from our basics page, and we're going to jump over here to our digital input page. Digital inputs represent something that's either going to be an on or an off status. It could also be a pulsed status. So for example, with an ethanol content sensor, that's a certain amount of pulses that happen over an elapsed period of time known as frequency. So this would be one example. Another example would be an oil pressure switch. Oil pressure switches are either going to be an on or an off status based on an oil pressure threshold. If we're below a certain oil pressure, the switch is on. If we're above that oil pressure, the switch is off. So these both represent two different types of digital inputs, but the idea of a digital input should make sense. It's going to either be able to count an on or an off state from the particular thing that we're trying to wire into a digital input. In the case of a basic on-off toggle switch, this is exactly what we're going to use a digital input for. What we're going to find here, in order to set up and work with an on-off toggle switch, we will be using a general purpose input. Now, the reason why we're not using another defined parameter in here, because these are used for a specific task or a function, and when we're looking at the runtime value or the value associated to setting up this channel, for example here, power steering switch, we'd be able to log that in our parameters and it would show power steering switch either on or off. If we're setting this for, let's say, boost control, obviously we don't want to use power steering switch. That's why we have to use a general purpose input. It allows us a lot of flexibility of what we want to use this for, and we can actually call that out here and label it. What I'm going to do here in the labeling is actually call this high boost switch, and I give that a custom name, and we can see now general purpose 1 is associated to our high boost switch. Now the source, this is going to be where we've wired our switch into for the link. When we're talking about a basic on-off toggle switch, or even a momentary button that we'll be pressing and releasing that can also have the same type of functionality, a pulsed input to the link, we'll find that we have to go in and know first where we've wired one leg of that switch into the link, which specific digital input. In my case, it'll be digital input 3. And then the other leg of the switch, are we sending a 12 volt into the link, or are we grounding the pin? So we're going in wiring the other leg of our basic switch or basic momentary button to a chassis ground. In my case, I prefer to always use a chassis ground whenever possible. So just keeps things a little bit more simplistic. However, you can use 12 volt or ground when we're setting up a switch. How we configure them will be different. I'm going to go through how to set this up, whether it's a ground input or a 12 volt input through your switch. In my case, I have one leg of my on-off toggle switch going to chassis ground, and then the other leg is going into the digital input 3. So when the switch isn't turned on, it's in the off state, we should find that the pin isn't grounded. And then when I do turn the switch on, it's going to create a ground path right to the digital 3 input pin, and the link should be able to count that as an active state. Let's go through and setting this up. It's very, very simple. Under the source, we're going to go ahead and define this as digital 3 and click OK.
Thanks for checking out our teaser clip. If you want to see the rest of this video and more than 500 hours of current EFI training we have to offer, make sure you click right here. If you want to go and check out more teaser clips from this training course, click here. And you don't want to miss any of the videos we're going to be releasing on this channel, so make sure you subscribe and click here. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys later.